Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle Haas. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of December 17th. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles that switch between hottest comics and trending comics. Trending comics is a more curated list written by Matt Tuck of the 5 books that are really starting to get liquid out there in the market. But before we get into the list, if you guys could drop me a like or comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps support the channel, do one of those things, I would appreciate it. But let us get into this list here today. Of course, it is Monday. We got to go through the list, and we got some really cool books to talk about, starting with this one right here in the number 5 spot. Of course, we're talking about Daredevil number 9, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 99th spot, just squeaking in there. And what is the significance of this book? Well, of course, this is the book written by David Mack that came out in 1999 and would feature the first appearance of the character known as Echo. Now, Echo, as I'm sure you guys are well aware, is the hero in the Daredevil universe that literally can echo any of her opponent's moves. She made her debut in the Hawkeye TV show, and for that reason, this is one of those books that had been heavily speculated on in the market. And like a lot of books have been doing, of course, we've seen major pullbacks, major corrections in price tags all across the board, and it does feel like a book like this is sort of kind of falling into that spot once again, where people are looking at the prices and thinking to themselves, you know, it's such a low point of entry at this particular price range. This character seems to have a big future in the MCU. I kind of like their portrayal in the Hawkeye show. Maybe it is worth picking this one up. Of course, the Echo show is supposed to be coming out next year, I believe that it is, and that one is supposed to be kind of a continuation of what was happening in the Hawkeye storyline, and seemingly would be setting up what is then going to be coming in the Daredevil Born Again series, as we know that Kingpin and Daredevil are going to play a role in the Echo TV show. But it's recently been announced that the Echo show was actually pushed out by 6 months. It looks like they're sliding it back on the schedule. They've had delays. They've had to do reshoots, and it does kind of start to beg the question, like, do we think that Echo might be the first Disney Plus TV show that actually gets canceled? I mean, when they originally announced that this character was going to be helming their own show, a lot of people, you know, even MCU fans that are like still in love with Phase 4 had questions over like why we would be sort of dedicating an entire series to this character when there are a lot of other characters that would seemingly be more interesting to watch on Disney Plus. But it is kind of interesting to hear that news and then see this book showing up on the trending list. And I think that has a lot to do with all the correction of prices and the delays, and people are starting to liquefy their copies. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 1,144 on the census. Fair market value is 220. This is half price from where it was a year ago. You can actually see in this graph, this is one that had the big boost up in 2021, kind of was, you know, floating at that $800 price point for quite some time, around the $700 range, and now kind of where it sits all the way back down to $200. This is the perfect example of a book that really just shot up way too fast, and the prices were unsustainable to be able to hold that level. Although where it sits now at $216 is still, you know, slightly higher than what it was selling for generally in 2020 at the $174 range. So interesting to think about, you know, will this book test levels below that of its 2020 prices? So far, that is not the case. 9.6's 30-day moving is $122, so, you know, about half price of the 9.8. And then $19.99 book, down at the bottom, you're not going to see its lab at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you see them being sold around that $100 to $120 price point. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week, and the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is a classic. This is a modern goodie, but of course the book I'm talking about is Venom number 3, new to the list this week, back on the list this week, now sitting in the 83rd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 2018, written by Donny Cates, and would feature the first appearance of the character known as Null. Now, Null, as I'm sure you guys are well aware, is the big bad of the symbiote universe, the evil leader of the symbiotes, the father of Venom, the son of actually Oblivion, if you happen to know your Marvel cosmic beans. But Null, of course, is a really important character, kind of culminated in the crossover event of King in Black, written by Donny Cates. And Null feels like a villain that, you know, is going to be around in Marvel Comics for quite some time. I mean, obviously, Venom has been an important character ever since his creation back in the 80s. He's been a fan favorite. The Venom franchise continues to grow, and it does feel like somewhere down the line, you know, maybe when we get some kind of Sony event film, if they want to build towards something, Null feels like a great villain to do that for. And so for that reason, this has been a book that, you know, not only is spec'd on, but I do think that a lot of people really enjoyed this particular Venom run, and it was a really great read. This is when Donny Cates was really firing on all cylinders, one of the best Venom storylines there is, and one of certainly the best Venom Venom characters that was created in this mythos. Now, as to why this book is showing up on the list this week, well, of course, I think it has a lot to do with the echo factor, where the book's prices have been correcting so much that it's hitting that floor where I think there's a lot of people who are interested in picking it up. Of course, it's a modern book. There's always going to be a lot of copies out there. There's always going to be a lot of movement in the market, and there's going to be a lot of people that want to own this book. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at those prices here. 9.8s have 3,965 on the census. That is quite a lot, basically hitting the 4,000 print count for this one. It is an all-white book, which does make it a lot easier to get those 9.8s because those dreaded spine ticks don't show up as much on the white covers. Fair market value is $250. 1 year moving was $311. 30-day moving is $240. But this is a book like every other book has had its pullback, has had its correction, shot up in early 2021 all the way to the $300 price point. Kind of was flirting with the $300 $290 price point for, trading sideways for about a year, and recently has finally capitulated down to the $250 price point, which again, like the Echo book, is still a lot higher than its 2020 price. So it does sort of beg the question, like, will this book be able to hold, generally speaking, at that level? All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is one that we actually haven't talked about on this list, or at least I don't remember talking about it. But this one right here is New Teen Titans #2, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 81st slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1980, written by George Perez, and would feature the first appearance of the DC character known as Deathstroke. Now, this is a really interesting book to talk about on the list this week, and I think there are a lot of interesting factors at play here. Of course, Deathstroke got introduced in the Snyder universe when we had the Batman-Superman movie. At the end, they had Lex Luthor talking to Deathstroke, implying that he was going to play a role in whatever was coming next in the Snyder universe. Of course, we never got the payoff for that tease. No one really knows what's kind of going on with DC right now that James Gunn is at the helm. It does sort of feel like, anecdotally, with the canceling of Henry Cavill and all that stuff, it does feel like that basically everything going on in DC is eventually going to come to an end. Aquaman, Jason Momoa is going to be coming to an end. No more Wonder Woman, no more The Flash. We're just going to get a hard reset on everything. And that does probably also include Deathstroke. But with that being said, Deathstroke still is a very important character to DC. And I would imagine that James Gunn would still want to use this character in his own universe. And so a lot of people, I think, are still thinking about DC keys being really important out there in the market. Of course, in my talking to dealers conversation at LA Comic-Con, we had a lot of conversations about how the DC books were really being spec'd on. A lot of people were looking for those DC keys, and this is a book right here that I think is a really important DC key coming out of the Bronze Age. So much so that not only is it trending this week, but it is actually going up in price. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. There's actually one 9.9 on the census, but let's jump down to the 9.8s. 778 on the census. Fair market value is 1,050, and this is actually a book that even with the pullbacks, even with the corrections in the current market, you can actually see that this is a book that is still trending upward and able to kind of hold the floor, so to speak, even at these new sort of prices. It jumped up like most books did in 2021 and kind of established that new floor around the $1,000 price point. And generally speaking, as recently as, a couple weeks ago, we do see this book still selling at that $1,000 price point. I think a lot of people are really bullish on the DC characters, and in particular, this character of Deathstroke. Down here at the 9.6s, definitely drops off quite a lot more, 1,212 on the census, and then really falls all the way down to $214. So, definitely a book that, is really only heavily desired in that 9.8 grade. At the 9.6s, definitely more of a collector copy. And then, of course, it's a 1980 book, so you're not going to see it slab at the low grade. But when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, it's still going to cost you around that $200 price point. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is one that is always fun to talk about. One of the biggest grails in the Bronze Age, if not the biggest grail in the Bronze Age. Of course, we're talking about Incredible Hulk number 181, up a whopping 36 spots, now sitting in the 34th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book written by Len Wein that came out in 1974 and would feature the first full appearance of the character known as Wolverine. Now, we know everyone went crazy when they had the official announcement that Hugh Jackman would be returning to the role of Wolverine in the Deadpool 3 film. I think that's probably one of the films that is most anticipated, from all the kind of MCU fans out there. I think it's really going to be fun to see what Deadpool does in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially if he's bringing Hugh Jackman's Wolverine with him. It does feel like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is going to be playing a role all the way through Secret Wars. So that's something that it's going to be really exciting for comic book collectors. And of course, this is a book that, everybody wants to have in their collection. I mean, say what you will about Hulk 181. It's a book that has a very high print count. I mean, relative high print count. Some of you guys say it's high. Some of you guys say it's not that high. But, when we're talking about 16,000 universal copies, they're definitely out there. But with that being said, I mean, every single comic book collector would love to have a copy of this book in their collection. So it's always going to be desired in the market. And one of the reasons I think it is trending this week, not so much so due to the fact that, people are excited about Hugh Jackman Wolverine, but with the correction of all the prices and where we kind of are in the economic market, when you look at some of the values that this thing is commanding now, as opposed to, a year ago or even 6 months ago, it feels really, really tempting. I mean, a lot of the books are finally coming back down in line to their 2020 prices or a little bit above their 2020 prices. And I think for a lot of people, they see that as an opportunity to get this book. A lot of people felt like there was going to be no way they were ever going to be able to afford this book for their collection. And now when they see the prices, they're getting really excited of having that opportunity once again, which is why I think when we had this sort of last month with this particular book, finally everyone is capitulating back to the prices, back to the trend line. And this is why it is trending, because everybody has it on their list. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.9 actually has 1 on the census. That is going to be one to follow whenever that sale happens. I think that for sure will be a $1 million book. 9.8s actually have 137 on the census. Fair market value is 86,000. 90-day moving is 92,000. This is one of those books that, definitely had a massive, massive sale a few months back. Here we had a $138,000 sale on Heritage Auctions in September, a lot higher than what it should have been, but those two definitely seem to be the outliers. This is the book that generally sits around the $90,000 price point. I mean, it is a big jump from where it was a year ago at the $50,000 price point. And you do kind of wonder, if you're somebody out there who had that book at the 9.8 grade and you see that is now commanding that $90,000 price point, I mean, you're kind of incentivized to sell. So, there is a breaking point when you get a sale at $138,000. All of these 137 come to market because everyone wants to cash in on that. And then that does the inverse effect. And then that actually drives down the price because, now it becomes very available out there in the market. So I think the floor will eventually stabilize for this thing, and that'll be healthier for the values of the book in the future. But across the board, basically this book has been coming down, kind of correcting in price. The 7.0s, 1,000 on the census, now selling around the $4,600 range in the 30-day moving. The 5.0s selling around the $4,000 range, and then the 4.0s selling around the $2,700, let's call it $3,000 level. And even though this is a 1974 book, it's a very, very popular one. You're always going to see slabs for this book all across all of the grades. But if you did want to get a low grade raw copy for yourself, it's still going to set you back around that $2,500 price point. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is another Bronze Age grail, one of the all-time classics, one of the all-time favorites for a lot of collectors. And this one, of course, is Amazing Spider-Man number 129, up a whopping 25 spots, now sitting in the 22nd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book written by Gary Conway that came out in 1974 and would feature the first appearance of the character known as the Punisher. Now, much like I was saying with the Wolverine book, I think this is another instance where the reason that it is trending is that finally the prices are coming back in line for collectors to be able to get their hands on this thing. I mean, ASM 129 is a grail for everyone out there in the market. Or I would say maybe if it isn't your grail, I think anyone who is a collector would love to have this book in their collection. And for that reason, everybody always has their eye on it. But where the prices were going for in 2021 and even early in 2022, it was just out of reach for a lot of people. And now that the prices are coming back in line, that's why you see a lot of movement for Hulk 181 and ASM 129. I mean, jumping 30 spots for books that sell quite a lot already is definitely a testament advertisement for deals being made out there in the market. Now, of course, Punisher is one of the all-time great characters. It feels like Jon Bernthal is a shoo-in to come to the MCU. It feels like he'll likely make his debut in the Daredevil Born Again series. And I think Jon Bernthal has this character down. I really, really do think that Punisher was one of those characters, if we rewind the clock back to the 80s and 90s, I mean, Punisher was one of the biggest Marvel characters there was. I think there's a lot of people that forget how popular of a character he was at that particular time. And I think that if we get, the right version of him in the MCU and we're finally able to get great stories with this character on the screen, I really do think that audiences are going to remember how great of a character he really is. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 164 on the census, similar census to that of Hulk 181, where there's about, 100 and change on the 9.8 grade. Fair market value for this one is $30,000. 30-day moving is $3,100. And this is actually a book that has, I would say, crashed even harder, or crashed if you want to call it that, than the prices of the 181s, where we saw record sales for this book selling at the $57,000 range, earlier this year. And then here now at the last sale on Heritage was at $25,000. So, if you're somebody who bought that $138,000 Wolverine and now it's selling for $90,000, we're talking about, a 30% correction on the value of your book, whereas this one was actually, a 50% drop or 100% drop. I can't do math right now, but you basically paid 2 times more than you should have for this particular key. And you can see the graph for this one, even at the 9.8 grade, it's very surprising that it would go up like that and then correct so hard. But, when you have 164 in the census and the prices are going where they are, if you're somebody who has that much equity in this book, I mean, you are going to be incentivized to sell. Across most of the grades, of course, it's been pulling back here. 8.0s now selling at the $2,100 range for the 30-day moving. 6.0s selling at that $1,400 range 30-day moving. And then 4.0s selling at the $1,000 range. So now this is a book that you can get kind of at that low grade under the 4-figure price point. And that is a really good price point for a lot of collectors because, like I mentioned, everybody who is a collector would love an ASM 129 in their collection. Anyways, that is all for this video. Those were GoCollect's hottest trending comics for the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. I'll see you in the next one.